Arkadaşlar hepiniz hoş geldiniz tekrar yeni yayınımıza. Muhteşem bir konuğumuz olacak. Ama bunun öncesinde ben kısaca yine yaptığımız etkinliklerden bahsetmek istiyorum. Samsun'da etkinliğimiz yapıldı, Bursa'da yapıldı. Onları takip edebilirsiniz. Ayrıca uluslararası alanda Dan Zahavi'yi ağırladık. Mark Meier'i ağırladık. Ve daha birçok önemli isimli Anadolu Felsefe Topluluğu'nun ve Görkem Kılıç Felsefe ve diğer şeyler kanalında ağırladık. Ve bugün birebir, yüz yüze bir konuğu ağırlıyoruz. Bu benim için ve topluluk için büyük bir onur. Çünkü bugün ağırladığımız isim gerçekten çok önemli bir isim. Kendisini tanıtacağım ve etkinlik zaten İngilizce olacak ama altyazıya ulaşabilirsiniz. Şimdiden güzel ve eğlenceli bir yayın diliyorum. İlk önce Türkçe tanıtacağım kendisini. Tim Wilson, teoloji ve din çalışmaları alanında uluslararası düzeyde tanınan bir akademisyen. Oxford Üniversitesi ve Birmingham Üniversitesi'nde görev yapmış olan Wilson, özellikle Hristiyan teolojisi, dinler arası diyalog ve modern dünyada inanç sistemlerinin dönüşümü üzerine yaptığı çalışmalara tanınıyor. Ayrıca kendisi çok iyi bir animasyon yapımcısı. Yaptığı bir animasyon 2019'da izleyicinin favorisi ödülünü aldı ve kendisi aktif şekilde kendisinden bir din profesörü az önce bahsettiğim gibi ve dindeki hikayeleri, diyelim bunların mitleri animasyonla gerçekleştiriyor, gözler önüne sürüyor, somutlaştırıyor ve bu çok güzel bir iş. Şimdi izninizle dili değiştiriyorum ve Tim'e hoş geldin diyorum. Tim, welcome.
Hi. No, I didn't realize you were going to do all that in Turkish.
Yeah,
It's very impressive.
I just started with the Turkish, but I must change language. And welcome again. And
Thank
I will
you.
introduce you in your mother tongue right now. So we are together with a multi-talented person, everybody. Tim Wilson. Tim Wilson is an internationally recognized scholar in theology and religion studies. Having served at both the University of Oxford and the University of Birmingham, Wilson is particularly known for his work on Christian theology, interfaith dialogue, and the transformation of belief systems in modern world. We are together a genius, actually. So I just want to say thank you, and it's an honor for me and our society, actually.
Well, it's an honor to be here.
Really?
Really.
Okay,
It's very
okay.
nice.
So you are professor of theology, which means you taught the gods, actually, and the religions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I tried. I was also a professor of education, so I never quite know which one takes precedence.
Yeah, okay, but I actually interested with in theology.
Yeah.
And today I have many questions for you. And
Go on, fire away.
Yeah. I guess it will be perfect, and I'm so excited with it. So let's start with the brief questions. Is it okay for you?
With
Brief questions.
go on, fire
So,
away.
Yeah.
Brief questions don't necessarily get brief answers,
Yeah, generally.
as you know.
Yeah, generally. Okay. Tim, what is the boundary between religion and ideology? When does a belief system become a religion, and when does it turn into an ideology?
Oh my goodness, I don't think I know. A religion seems to be a formal thing. An ideology is a formal thing. Ideology would suggest something, some sort of aim. A religion could be anything. We could have a religion which is based on the worship of this pot plant.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to have God. An ideology is really an obsessive following after something, and again, it doesn't need to be formal.
Yeah.
So for example, you could have a political ideology,
Yeah.
which some people could follow so fervently you would think it was a religion, and it's something which is all-consuming. So when you come to the big religions, so the big three: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism,
Yeah.
you're thinking about religions which are trying to define and control ordinary life.
Yes. Exactly.
And so in that sense, they are both ideologies and religions, I suppose.
Whoa, this is a very impressive
Yeah.
interpretation, by the way. But sometimes I see that some people being obsessive with their religion and their beliefs.
Or particularly converts.
Yeah.
because they're trying to convince themselves as well as other people.
Yes.
And it's very interesting. Of those three religions, Islam and Christianity are proselytizing religions. They want to convert people. They feel that it's the mission to share their conviction. Whereas Judaism doesn't want to proselytize. But this is a new idea. This is a post-Christianity idea. So at the time of Christ, Judaism was a proselytizing religion as well, and people were enthusiastically embracing Judaism, but they were enthusiastic. In the Roman Empire, they were enthusiastically embracing anything that presented a life beyond this one, because this one was so nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah.
And if you were a slave or somebody sort of out in the sticks, you could only hope that the next life would be better.
Yes.
So, or a soldier. So, for example, you've got the Mithras tradition, and you've got all these mystery religions going on, coming often from Egypt, and maybe Christianity takes quite a lot from that, but so does Judaism. Judaism transforms. If you go to the beginning of the Jewish scriptures, there isn't. I'm going to say something so shocking here. There is no hint of an afterlife.
Really?
So if you go to Genesis 38, which is the story of Onan, it's so clear there that your afterlife is through your children.
Oh my God.
And in the case of Onan, he's expected to have children for his older brother who has died unexpectedly.
Whoa, that's very interesting.
And he doesn't go along with this plan because he wants his own afterlife. He wants his own children. He doesn't want to do the job for his brother who's dead. And of course he's struck down dead because of this this selfish act. But that particular story tells us that early Judaism wasn't really interested. It hadn't thought of the idea of an afterlife, as for example Plato thinks of an afterlife and a pre-life. He thinks very much of a spiritual life is superior, and that gives us Gnosticism, which dominates the 1st, 2nd century.
Yeah.
With the idea that the next life must be better than this one.
Yes.
And Islam picks up some of these ideas because it has no choice, because it's in that milieu. And anyway, people were living in a particularly severe part of the world. You know, in Mecca and Medina. This is a tough place to live, I would say.
Yeah.
And during war.
Yeah,
you know.
Unfortunately. And Islam says we are universal. And actually, do you know something about the Christianity? Christianity says we are universal or not?
Well, it does. Of course it does. Because we are... Christianity picks up the Jewish idea that we're made in the image of God. And therefore, whoever we are, we share one central common feature, that we are godlike.
Yeah.
So we are universal.
Okay.
And I don't know whether that was necessarily the early Christian idea, but the early Christians were Jews. It was just a form of Judaism. And it doesn't really become Christianity as such, even when Constantine picks it up and makes Constantinople, Istanbul. The center of Christianity and the center of the world. And named after him. But even then, it's not quite Christianity, because there are competing versions of Christianity. It's only when Iznik and Nicaea takes place in 324, I think. 324. And 325. Sorry, it's the anniversary this year. 325, and it's only when that takes place that you have a clearly defined statement of universal Christianity, and that gets into trouble in the 11th century, 7th century with the Filioque, when the Greek church says the Latin church has taken a word, has added a word, and the Latin church says the Greek church has lost a word, and that word in Latin is simply one word, Filioque, and it distorts the concept of the unity of God.
Okay.
Well, that's what the Greeks were saying.
Okay, that's very.
And they have a good and then you get the Protestant revolution, which is then a breaking away from the Roman Church, and then today you have 600 or 800 different versions of Christianity, I believe.
Yes. We are living with that, and also
and that takes you back. Who's the funny fellow who says that religion moves from polytheism to monotheism or something?
I don't know.
I don't think there is a linear progress.
Yeah.
Because even in early Judaism, time of Isaiah, what you've really got is a thing called henotheism, which is the recognition that there are other gods, but our God is the best. The other gods are insignificant.
Yeah.
So there may even Islam is picking up on that idea with the jinn.
Yeah.
So there are other spiritual beings who may think they're gods, but they're not.
I have a question about it actually, but
I'm sorry.
We need to wait. So
right, let's go on. I've been waffling away.
No, it's perfect. I'm serious about it. So, if I may, I will continue with the second question.
Go on, yes.
Okay.
These are supposed to be quick questions.
Okay. Secularization theories generally predicted that religion would retreat with modernization. However, today we still see religion playing a strong role globally. How do you explain this phenomenon?
Well, you've got the wrong word. You talk about secularization. What we should do is go back to the industrial revolution, or even to the Enlightenment. So religion ought to be suppressed by the Enlightenment. But in fact, it's the Enlightenment which gives us these 800 versions of Christianity, the multiplicity. So once you can start printing, as opposed to relying on the poor little monk in the cell, or relying on Muslims to remember perfectly, to be Hafiz, to remember perfectly the
I have a question about
the text. Once you've got the printing press, the floodgates are open, and you can question everything and reprint everything. You know, there's a fellow in Britain who's currently in prison, called Tommy Robinson, who's produced a version of the Quran which he believes is re-edited so that all the surah are in order, are in chronological order.
So
it's not a very academic piece of. It's not a very academic work. But it is interesting. He can only do that because there is a printing press.
Yes, and I saw the documentary which is about the Quran, and they say it's have been changed many times in the time, actually, because there are some surahs about the woman, let's say, in the heaven, but they say no, it's not a woman actually, it's a piece of some fruits.
It's there is so all this textual criticism was developed really for the Iliad and the Odyssey in the 19th century, and then it was applied to the Christian Bible.
Oh my God!
And particularly to Genesis, and then to the synoptic Gospels. And the big question was who wrote this bit first, and what order should it be in? So Tommy Robinson's rejigging of the Quran is within that tradition. It's just that he's not clever enough to do it right. And he's a sweet boy, but he is in prison. Let's not forget that fact. And he's in prison because he's got some very strange views. I think he's being over punished, a little bit like Julian Assange, but nevertheless, he's he did a talk at the Oxford Union, and it was very interesting. But he has a particular understanding of Islam, which I think is foolish. It's a sort of political understanding of Islam, and it's an understanding of Islam as a threatening creed. I don't think Islam is a threatening creed, because, and this is the point, the text, whether it's the Jewish text, the Christian text, or the Islamic text, is the preserve of the community. So you cannot open you cannot recite the Quran without it being understood in the light of the hadiths. The hadiths are the things which we need to criticize, rather than to say, did this surah exist in this particular form? Is this word actually what is meant? Because it's much harder with the Quran to say this, because it wasn't really preserved or passed on with the written word. It was passed on with an oral tradition of memory.
Yeah.
And that could be, arguably, much more secure than this oral tradition where you've got the marginalia creeping into the text.
Yeah.
So, and so just one letter will change a word completely.
Yeah.
And that letter could have crept in. So there's a really nice example in the shortest book in the Bible, which is a letter of St. Paul to Philemon, and about a slave called Onesimus. And Paul says, send the slave back to his master, which is a disturbing thought now. But Paul says, I'm speaking to you now as it could be as an old man or a presbyter, as a church officer. And it's just one word, one letter.
Yes.
Could have been added or taken away. And you don't really have that discussion in the Quran.
Yeah.
You're talking about whole words or whole ideas, because it's more conceptual, because it's preserved in the memory.
Yes, and we say that chain of transmission, actually,
Exactly.
The isnat,
It's a different concept.
Yeah.
So the ideas of form criticism and the things which developed in Germany in the late 19th century don't quite work with the Quran. They work with the hadiths, and they work with the life of the Prophet and things which are clearly written down, but the Quran is much harder.
Probably, but I'm smiling because of that. When I ask a question, guys, he answered two of them. Because
I'm sorry.
I have a question
so
about.
You're going to have to go through this and edit all your plans.
Yes, when I ask a question,
yeah,
just one question, and you answered the two of them. That's perfect.
I was doing a thing a few months ago about reality TV, and I was on stage with some sort of vaguely famous people. A fellow called Ryland, who's got teeth, and he was sitting there. We were sitting next to each other, and I was asked a question which should have generated a very simple answer. In fact, I started telling a story, and the lady who was comparing this meeting tried to get in the way, and Ryan steps and says, "I'm going to get the popcorn," and he let me go on. I was in heaven.
Yeah, they need a popcorn, actually.
Yeah,
yes,
you need popcorn.
Yes, guys. Okay, I'm continue.
Yeah.
If I may. So, okay, let's continue with it. What do the differences in shared narratives, Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, among the Old Testament and New Testament and the Quran, of course?
Yes. Well, you mentioned two, the very specific, Adam and Eve and Noah. Take Noah first. So the Christian interpretation of Noah's flood is that it is a punishment. The Islamic interpretation is that it's a warning.
Yes.
And that's quite a different.
Yes, that's very interesting.
Take on things, and the Adam and Eve, the Adam and Eve story, as indeed one of your colleagues is particularly in love with John Milton, as I am.
Yes,
and John Milton explores this idea. But Adam and Eve are punished for sin, hematia, a failing, and then you get the division between East and West, between following Augustine or following a much more Greek understanding of the collapse of the world order through decay, really, which brings in death. Whereas Augustine would say death is a punishment. For Islam, it's not a sin; it's forgetfulness, which I think, frankly, the early fathers of the church would have considered fairly sinful in its own right. You have no right to forget the person who's just made you and what he told you to do. So forgetfulness is not really an excuse. Oh, I forgot. Well, you're still not going to get into Oxford. You learn your multiplication tables, and if you forget, that's your fault. You get no rewards for saying I can't remember.
Yeah, probably. But you're right. In the Islamic tradition, they say always it's a it's a significance of rebirth, actually, because after Noah, we started to live a new version of the life without the sins, because they.
Well, this is in all of the traditions. So it's often represented in the Jewish traditions of having these very long lives.
Yeah.
So you go back to the thing we started off about. Is there an afterlife? No, you just have a particularly long life on earth, and then you die, and you are remembered in the books, or in the stars. And it's a Greek idea as well. The Greeks didn't have an afterlife. Either you became a star or you were sort of vague memory, a sort of shadow under the earth. Yeah. That was it. And then the Iliad, I think, is it Iliad? I think it's the Odyssey. Suddenly has this idea that you can talk to the shadows, to the shades. It's very Ursula K. Le Guin.
But can we say that for the Roman Empire, because after the Caesars, that his nephew, Octavius, created a new church for him.
Well, he didn't actually.
Really?
No, he didn't call himself a god. Other people did, and Caesar was called a god as well. But this idea of the deification of individuals that was already running around. Hercules gets it. So it's already in the. So if you are a god, then you are going to continue living. There's no point in ordinary people living. Gherkin may have an afterlife. Tim won't. Tim only lives to serve others. Therefore, once this life is over, and I built a few pyramids, that's it. It's only the pharaoh who is going to glory. You see your name.
Yes,
there we are. But it's only the pharaoh who deserves an afterlife, because the pharaoh is a symbol of authority. The pharaoh is a symbol of God.
Yeah.
And ordinary people, they don't deserve an afterlife. So it's only once you get into that sort of thing of sort of universal Platonism through Gnosticism, where Platonism, this philosophy, becomes a religion,
That's a good point.
and then becomes a superstition as well, and keeps and it creeps into so many other traditions.
So I have a
Even in the 19th century, William Blake was a Gnostic.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, that's true. And I have a question about it. So you said that when the philosophy became a religion, actually.
Well, the Greeks didn't know the difference between religion and philosophy.
Yes, and
so the Greeks would call everything a philosophy.
Exactly. They call the science as a philosophy either. So
for example, Pythagoras, the Pythagoreans basically had a religion based on mathematics, which is lovely.
They have rituals.
Yeah,
they have rituals.
But the idea, so they're Masons. So the idea of the idea of mathematics as religious turns up in mysticism again and again. It turns up in Sufism. It turns up in the Kabbalah. And it turns up, of course, in Christianity. Where 3 is 1. But 3 is 1 is also there in the tree of life in the in Kabbalism, which is probably why you're not supposed to study Kabbalism until you're 30.
But I know that. So Isaac Newton worked in alchemy, and
yes.
Yeah.
You've worked in alchemy.
No, I just read some.
You've just read some. So alchemy is of course a Muslim word. And it's bastardized into the word chemistry. Newton, the man with the apple. He thought of himself as an alchemist.
Yes. I said that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually. So we need to be careful actually when the religion become a philosophy.
We need to be careful about prejudice. And we need to embrace other people's ideas, which may not be our ideas. We then call them, that's a heresy, but that's a superstition, or that's fake. Fake news is only when you're trying to promote your own idea, and that becomes propaganda. But propaganda itself is a word which was coined by the Catholic Church, the propagation of the faith. It's about making sure it's just another form of education.